Hello, you absolute legends. This is me, in the year 2002, 23 years ago, setting a brand new world record on the train stage in GoldenEye 007. You will have to forgive the video quality. Back in those days, we would need to record our gameplay to a VCR and then buy a capture card and then connect the VCR to the capture card and then record it onto our computer. At the turn of the century, video capture software favored heavily compressed, low-resolution videos with small file sizes as internet connections were slow, hard drives were small, and graphics cards were weak. So unfortunately, this is how history was captured in my game of choice. Train is a relatively simple level. You run from one end to the other, and then use the watch laser to cut away the locks on the corner panel, allowing you to escape. And I mean this with all sincerity when I say that this section here, the section where you need to cut away the locks, is the single most challenging section in all of GoldenEye speedrunning. This one task of cutting away the locks is where legends were made. Obviously, not because cutting away the locks is difficult in of themselves. I mean, you literally have to do it to escape the level, which everyone does when they play the game. But rather, I mean that the skill ceiling is higher than any other technique speedrunners need to contend with. The speed at which players can cut away these locks is generally what determines how fast a player can finish the level. And for 25 years, these locks have been seen as a rite of passage, held in the highest regard, considered the pinnacle of GoldenEye speedrunning skill. And then, in the blink of an eye, a quarter of a century of GoldenEye speedrunning history was essentially washed away, after a way to warp out of the train and skip the locks completely was recently discovered. This is undoubtedly one of the most shocking discoveries in GoldenEye history. Not necessarily because it saves the most time, but because of the contrast from going from the gold standard of speedrunning competency to a simple warp that completely bypasses the toughest challenge the game has to offer. In this video, we will take a quick look at what has recently turned the GoldenEye community upside down. I really hope you enjoy. Now legends, I am genuinely excited about today's sponsor, Patrick Adair Designs. I have always wanted a set of rings for my family, a set of heirlooms that would bring us all together. So when Patrick Adair Designs, who specialize in amazing custom-designed, handcrafted rings, came and offered to make me, my wife, and my son a set of rings, it was perfect. They have so many unique designs and materials at all different price ranges, so you can really get something that is personally catered to your tastes. I'm a big fan of darker tones, so I chose black marble, but of course my wife has a completely different taste to me and got the more classic diamond glowstone, which looks amazing and is still incredibly affordable. But what makes these rings really cool is that you can engrave something personal that means something to you. So for me, I chose the word purpose, my wife chose the word peace, and for our son's ring, me and my wife chose the word greatest, which is our blessing to him. If you have a spouse, a friend, a family member that you want to bond with or get a gift for, getting a set of rings is a beautiful idea. Or if you just love cool looking rings, Patrick Adair Designs are amazing. And right now they are currently running their annual holiday sale, so for a limited time you can buy one and get one free, which is a crazy deal. Plus you can get an extra 10% off if you use the code CARL. I strongly recommend checking them out. In GoldenEye, there are 3 levels that are generally seen as the most skill-intensive in speedrunning. And skill-intensive generally means that the skill ceiling is high enough so that the best players have the opportunity to demonstrate their superiority over other players and achieve faster times. And these levels are Silo, Control, and Train. Some levels are very basic, like Dam Agent or Surface 2 Agent, where the world records are relatively easy to achieve and usually just consist of running in straight lines. But other levels are of course more complex. And the 3 aforementioned stages are what most people would describe as the most complex as far as the demand on pure technique. And this is why the most naturally gifted player to ever grace the game, Rayan Isran, has an untied sweep on Control with all world records on all difficulties, beating every other player. And he has an untied sweep on Train and holds all of the world records on Silo. Aside from being the world champion, an untied sweep on a level is basically the next highest honor one can attain. And Rayan Isran is the only player to have an untied sweep in GoldenEye, and he even has 2. Control is difficult mainly because of the starting area, where players need to take out a room full of guards and turrets. And in order to do this the quickest way, you need headshots and the ability to aim on the turrets very quickly, which is challenging because they are relatively small targets from a distance. Silo is challenging because the level is basically a giant obstacle course, jam-packed with guards and computers and tables and crates and stairs. And because the frame rate is generally so low with all of the guards the game has to keep track of, it makes controlling Bond exponentially more difficult. The lower the frame rate, the harder it is to execute small and precise movements. And this ties into what makes the locks on train so challenging. First, the frame rate is very low at this point in the level. In order to combat this and increase the frame rate, players will try to kill as many guards as they can earlier in the stage, but nonetheless the frame rate is certainly not stable. But adding to this, the locks on train exemplify what makes GoldenEye speedrunning uniquely challenging. And that is the reliance on the ability to make very small adjustments with the control stick. Now personally, I love the Nintendo 64 controller, and I love the control stick. This might be because it was the first console I ever owned, and I've played these games for thousands of hours, so I'm used to it. But I seem to be in the minority here. Looking back, many people don't think fondly of the N64 control stick, and find it very difficult to use and master. In fact, I'd say the control stick is one of the main reasons people say that the Nintendo 64 doesn't hold up, as the controls are seen as too challenging for casual play to be enjoyable, especially after modern controllers and control sticks have been around now for decades. And GoldenEye particularly emphasizes very fine motor control. You can contrast this with a game like Super Mario 64, which you all know I love to do at every opportunity. When you watch a player who shows their input display, you'll see them almost always pushing their control stick to the maximum value, i.e. all the way to its limit. This is because movement in Mario is based on the input value of the control stick, so the higher the value, the faster he moves. But in GoldenEye, we use buttons to move, not the control stick. So the control stick is only used for aiming. And in GoldenEye, aiming is everything. And when you watch someone play a level like Train showing an input display, you can see that it's completely different to a game like Super Mario 64. The use of the control stick is a lot more subtle, and especially at the locks, where you can see very rapid small movements. As someone who is an expert in this game, I can attest that making fast, repetitive, precise, and small movements on an N64 controller like this is far, far harder than it looks. And until you actually try to do this, especially with a low frame rate, you will not be able to appreciate just how hard this is to do. So I suppose you'll just have to take my word for it. And that's why the skill ceiling on Train is so high. Back in 2006, I set a new world record for Train on the Agent difficulty, getting a time of 1 minute and 6 seconds. At the time, this was considered one of the best records in the game when achieved. And since that time, there have been no major strategy improvements, no major new discoveries, nothing. But let's compare how fast I did the locks in 2006 to the player Henrik Norgren, who set a time of 55 seconds in 2023, 17 years later. Literally, the only difference was technique. Henrik blew my locks out of the water, not because he used a different strategy, but because he is a more skillful player. And over the course of multiple decades, people had become more proficient at the game, and players who could control their thumbs better and do these tiny movements to perfection could destroy the locks much faster. Over the years, all of the very best players had famous world records on Train because of the locks. David Clemens, world champion for many years, had a very famous world record time of 1 minute with unbelievable locks. Mark Rutsu, considered one of the most naturally gifted players ever, brought the record down to 57 seconds. Henrik Norgren, who is a level specialist who has possibly focused on Train more than anyone else in history, has lowered the record many times in the past. And of course, Rayan Isran, the greatest player ever, who at the insane age of 10 began setting records and blowing everyone else out of the water. As I said before, I set the world record of 106 in 2006, and then a year later, this new, young, annoying kid comes along and within a year lowers the record 5 seconds to 101. Not because he is smarter than me, or because he theory crafted this amazing new strategy, but because he is just in another universe to me when it comes to raw skill. And the locks on train uniquely allow the skill of players to truly shine, arguably more than anything else in the entire game. Truly, the lock sequence on train was sacred, basically the holy grail of GoldenEye skill. For a player to get a world record on train agent cemented them in history as one of the greatest players ever. And then, on the 9th of December 2025, out of nowhere, the strategist Onslaught posted to the forums a message simply titled, "Train Locks Warp." And from that point onwards, everything would be changed forever. Insane warps in GoldenEye aren't anything new. The most famous example, of course, being the depot warp. With this warp, we can't even open the door because it's locked. The only reason we can get through is because there is a tiny gap in the door frame. I won't repeat why warps work in GoldenEye as I did that in my previous video already, but one thing to note is that the smaller the gap, the harder it is to hit a warp. However, switching weapons to warp like we do on Depot isn't the only type of warp we have access to. There is also a technique called an R-lean warp. When Bond leans to the left or right, he does so with very high speed. And the highest speed we can reasonably and predictably achieve is by leaning to one side and then immediately leaning all the way to the other side. With this speed, we can cover a fair amount of distance in a single frame. This type of warp was only recently discovered back in 2021, and was used to escape the jail cell on the Bunker 2 level, ultimately saving several seconds on each difficulty. I suppose the recent nature of this R-lean warp is probably why the new discovery on train wasn't found earlier, because it uses the same technique. However, on train, things are much more precise. As outlined in his post, Onslaught realized there was a tiny gap between the corner of the floor panel and the wall. And I'm not kidding when I say tiny. The depot gap that is infamously hard to hit is 4.5 units wide. This gap on train is 0.004 units wide, which is 1,000 times smaller. The only reason Onslaught realized this gap even existed was by reducing Bond's width by a factor of 1,000. And now, after this gap has been found, I'm sure every single corner in the entire game will now be examined in the exact same way to see what else can be found. And while the gap is so small it's hard to believe it could be abused, with the R-lean and the perfect angle, it was found to be possible to warp out of the train on a console. In order to get the warp to work, we need to run into the corner and then lean to the left as you hit the corner. When you do this, Bond's momentum continues to carry him forwards, and because you are leaning to the left but momentum is carrying you to the right, what ends up happening is that while Bond's position is technically in the corner and can't go any further, his central position moves to the right because he is still in a left lean. You can contrast this with me just standing in the corner and then leaning to the left. This doesn't do anything because Bond's central position is still in the corner. But if I run into the corner and then lean left, the momentum pushes Bond's central position beyond the corner, and now I'm physically positioned in the corner but in a full left lean. This means the distance between the left lean and a full right lean is large enough that if you were now to fully lean to the right, you can theoretically make it to the other side of the gap. But of course, the angle needs to be perfect. Once it was confirmed that this was possible on console, a gold rush ensued. Players were coming out of the woodwork to play train, and many players immediately began setting personal bests. But while many players could easily set personal bests, a new world record didn't immediately happen. That's because the warp is still really precise, and players were spending a bit of time to set up the warp. And it is easier for slower players to beat their previous times because slower players already took a long time to destroy the locks. So this strategy really helped slower players more than anyone else. But because the world record already required super fast locks, it was much harder to beat. To beat the world record, you would still need a very fast run overall, and then a really fast warp. So it's no surprise that the first person to beat the world record with the new strategy was the current world record holder, Henrik Norgren, who beat the world record by 2 seconds and achieved a time of 53 seconds. When I saw this world record, I already thought it was very good. But then the next day, the player Carl Magnus Wall tied 53. But when he did it, he used a much faster warp setup. And the reason Carl's warp was faster is because he didn't back himself up to prepare for the warp. He simply ran straight into position. Previously, everyone had been getting into the corner, then backing up, and then running into it again to get the momentum required. But Carl just YOLO'd and went straight in. So you can see how the warp quickly started to become optimized. And then, one day after seeing Carl's tied record with a much more optimized setup for the warp, on the 13th of December 2025, the King of Train himself, Rayan Isran, would achieve this run.
When you get straight up and down. You mean like move the stick up and down? Whoa! Oh my god! Holy shit! Holy fuck! Oh my god. That's fucking insane.
It's hard to express how insane it is that after playing this level decades ago, setting new world records, and then watching this level for the past 2 decades, that suddenly out of nowhere, we can now completely skip the locks on train. It is shocking to say the least. This trick saves at least 5 seconds if done perfectly, which is gigantic for any level, let alone one on Agent. This really makes me believe that there might be a lot more to discover in this game. If we overlooked this for 25 years, what else are we overlooking? This is truly incredible, one of the craziest strategy developments since the game's release. And while it does have the unfortunate downside of lowering the skill ceiling on this level and essentially making all of the previous amazing runs redundant, this discovery is just so damn cool that I'm not even mad. If anything, this makes the future of the game all the more uncertain and exciting. Thank you so much for watching, you legends. I hope you're having a fantastic day, and I will see you in the next video.